Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about the housing market in the United States right now. So, if you weren't already aware, the US is currently dealing with a pretty severe, multifaceted housing crisis that is directly affecting millions of Americans nationwide. Factors such as incredibly high mortgage rates, um, unaffordable and unrealistic prices of homes, um, stagnant wages, and just the general lack of new homes being built are all factors contributing to this drastic plunge in home sales that we've been seeing lately. People within the industry, within the government, corporate banks, and even the Federal Reserve are all saying that this is potentially the worst time to buy a house in the past 40 years. So, to fully understand the gravity of the situation, it's important to look back at trends and data over time to really understand what we're dealing with right now. So, for example, in the past, the average home cost roughly 2.6 times the yearly household income. Today, that number is closer to 5.8. So, today, homes are being valued at roughly 6 times what the average American makes in a year. To sort of illustrate this even further, to be able to afford the median priced house in the United States right now, which is roughly $433,100, the average American needs to make at least $166,600. The only issue with this is the average income right now in this country is only $74,580. So obviously, there's a huge disparity there, and the cost of living is consistently outpacing the rate at which incomes are increasing. In fact, since 2000, the value of houses have increased 162%, whereas incomes have only increased by 78%. Um, so, to understand how the US found itself in this precarious situation in the first place, I'm going to run you through a quick little timeline of events, um, just to give you an idea of how we ended up here in the first place. So immediately following the pandemic, once businesses started reopening and people started going out and spending money and borrowing money, and there was just a lot more money being circulated, the Federal Reserve responded to this by hiking up interest rates, which is standard procedure. That's what they do to combat inflation. But as a result, um, mortgage rates also followed suit and increased as well. Interest rates and mortgage rates are heavily influenced by one another, so that's why that happened. Um, but it's also important to note that even before the pandemic, the prices of houses were already pretty insanely high, a lot more than what would be considered reasonable. So, considering the prices pre-pandemic, the incredibly high prices pre-pandemic, and the incredibly high mortgage rates post-pandemic, uh, they kind of created this perfect storm that sent the housing market spiraling out of control and made the idea of home ownership completely out of reach for the average American. So obviously, this is not a sustainable model, and home ownership for young Americans in particular, if the market continues at its current trajectory, is virtually unattainable. Um, so after hearing that, you're probably thinking, well, this just sounds like a simple supply and demand issue. There's only so many existing homes, and the demand for housing is incredibly high right now, which is correct. That analysis is true, but it's um, important to understand that there's such a low supply of houses right now because for well over the past decade, since the 2008 financial crisis, homes have been chronically underbuilt, resulting in a negative 3.2 million deficit that we're seeing right now. Um, in fact, in the 2010s, fewer homes were built per capita than any other decade on record. So you're probably hearing this and thinking, well, why not just build more homes? That would satisfy the demand, which it would. That is correct. But the issue is it's not really profitable to build homes right now for developers. Um, During, and after the pandemic, uh, supply chain disruptions and material prices spiked. We're dealing with a labor shortage right now, so it would take at least 800,000 new construction workers just to meet the demand for housing right now. And developers just can't really secure the funding and the financing to start new projects right now. And this isn't just an issue for prospective homeowners. Similar trends can be observed in the rental housing as well. Um, According to one study, the United States needs to build $4.3 million to sort of 4.3 million apartments by 2035 to sort of remedy the underbuilding that I mentioned that happened after the 2008 financial crisis. So obviously there is a shortage of apartments, and then considering other economic determinants such as the super high inflation that we're seeing right now, is making average rent prices soar across the country. In fact, since 1980, the average price of rent has gone up nearly 10%. And for the first time in decades, the rent to income ratio has gone up to 40%, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly taxing for low to moderate income households, which make up almost 70% of renters in the entire country. So obviously this issue is incredibly complex, and really it's going to take a lot of effective policy making and legislation to resolve it. So a few solutions have been proposed. For example, one solution is increasing access to affordable financial services. So the idea behind this is that individuals that wouldn't typically or necessarily apply for a traditional loan can start borrowing money and generating wealth and maybe someday become a homeowner. As far as construction goes, a lot of companies have been exploring new ways to actually build homes, such as modular and panelized construction, which is essentially like taking pre-assembled pieces and kind of fitting them together like Legos, which can drastically cut down on the time that it takes to make homes, and the cost of doing so. Excuse me. And then even 3D printing is an avenue that some companies have been exploring, although it hasn't really gained as much traction just because it takes a long time and it's not really as cost efficient as they were hoping. But really the most realistic approach to resolving this issue is going to be what we call safeguarding naturally occurring affordable housing. So this has to do with like older pre-existing houses and apartments, typically in urban areas where rent has historically been pretty low. So the idea is to incentivize landlords to keep rent affordable, to retain their tenants, and to essentially stop gentrification from happening in those neighborhoods. So you're hearing all this and probably wondering, when will this ever end? Like, when will this end? Is there even a light at the end of the tunnel? And the answer to that essentially varies depending on who you ask. According to my research, some economists are optimistic that we could break the national logjam in about 3.5 to 4 years. This is assuming that the Federal Reserve keeps inflation to a minimum and that incomes continue at their current pace, or really ideally they start to improve. And this number looks closer to 5 to 6 years in large metro areas, just because that's where the issue of affordable housing is the most concentrated. Anyways, so the current state of affairs for the United States housing market is unfortunately pretty bleak, and it's gonna continue to be an uphill battle for prospective homeowners and renters alike in the coming years. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really gonna take a lot of creative policy making and legislation to target and address the issues that I mentioned, such as inflation and high mortgage rates and stagnant wages and the lack of construction going on right now, and really just the unaffordability of houses in general. and it's going to have to start with the federal government and work its way down, all the way down to local municipalities. So it's going to be a collective effort. It's going to have to be a collective effort. And if corrective action isn't taken, I'm afraid that this could result in a much greater humanitarian crisis in the future, which hopefully it doesn't. Anyways, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.